everyone. Thanks for joining us. I guess this is month two of providing some pretty in-depth support for you guys as you go out there and work with this tool internally and go out and support your customers. So we're gonna run through a pretty detailed sales process here. We kind of went through a framework last month called DOES, but we're going to get even more specific, more in depth on this call because a lot of people asked about, how do they position it? How do I sell it? Number one question we get is, how do I sell this? And I think one of the big challenges, and you'll see it throughout this presentation, um, one of the major challenges is just it's just confidence, interestingly enough. But anyway, we'll take you through this presentation. I'm just getting it dialed in here. I'll share my screen. And as part of this, we're going to give you guys four or three different documents. Get an extremely thorough checklist that you can use as a sales tool for both customers and prospects. And then we have some white labelable flyers, business or sales flyers that you can use to engage with customers. All right, so I'm going to go in presentation mode here. And hopefully when I do this, you can see my screen. I know we had some snafus last time. That's why they don't let the CEO out of the office all that much. Never let me do stuff. All right, so share. I'm going to share screen number 2. How are we doing? Are you seeing the screen? Did I do this properly this time?
You did.
Holy cow. All right. And along the way, we've got some familiar faces. We got Tim and DB, as he's affectionately known as around here, or David
Mhm,
Bopst.
mhm.
And so we'll jump in. And as always, like, please feel free to ask questions. We want to make this interactive, but really want to tell you or show you how to present this tool, again, internally and for customers and prospects. And then we'll talk about a couple additional things as well throughout this. We'll talk about Betty, which is a relatively imminent release, and how that's going to categorically change your business and your customers and prospects business. And then we're going to talk about how we will jump on any and every sales call that you have with customers and prospects to help you move this stuff forward and start to grow effectively. Because my last disclaimer is I am working from home today, so if you hear a dog barking, I apologize. I'll try to be quick on the mute button here. But all right. So really, so the whole concept is from visibility to revenue. The visibility portion is something that just every MSP and every customer, every business in general lacks. I give the analogy all the time. And, you guys have been in this space long enough. You've seen the firewall companies, you've seen the network companies. They've all had access to this, some of this data or this data. In fact, you've had access to this data via Microsoft tenants for the last 10, 15 years, if not longer, but no one's put a presentation layer in a lot of this stuff. And that's fundamentally, what we've done to start. And we'll take you through the platform and how you position it, via the Microsoft integration, the Google integration. But this should be used for both customers and prospects. This should honestly be the easiest tool for you to use, demonstrate value, and grow. Hands down, this should be the absolute easiest tool for you to use. I think, again, it's incumbent upon us, to show you how to use it properly, and that's what we're going to do here. So as we look at this, right, this workshop, touch on some of this, but this is what we're going to go through. The main problem, we'll show you how to, reframe this. We'll show you how to, create the offer, run the prospect, and I'll show you some very detailed elements of these reports and stuff that you want to focus in on. Will help you translate the findings into risk and savings, and then we'll help you understand how to convert. I mean, again, this should be the easiest tool to convert, downstream sales of additional tools as needed, and certainly advisory services prior to trying to cram all these AI services out there. And if you want, we do the role play and commit the next actions. That's stuff that we're going to really try to drill into your heads moving forward. So I've been in this space for a long time, 30-ish years. David's probably been equally as long, but built a large MSP, $30 million MSP, and exited that, been on all sides of this marketplace. And I think still one of the main problems, and we're all guilty of this, is that we let the customers and prospects dictate outcomes, right? And I think that's just a general issue across the MSP spectrum, right? And call it, it is what it is. And I'll be a little bit blunt here, but, a lot of MSPs just don't know how to sell effectively, right? Or they don't, they lack the confidence. And we'll kind of talk about confidence and what becomes mandatory here in a moment. But, this is one of the main reasons why we built this tool, because this tool should give you the confidence, because this is a fact-based tool, right? Because you're showing customers and prospects their actual data. You're showing them the facts. But this is in general, this is a mindset that I think, regardless if it's, better tracker or what have you, this is a mindset shift that I think every MSP needs to go through moving forward, because, as it goes, right? This world's getting even increasingly more complex. The barriers of entry to get into this market is lower, and you got to start dictating the outcomes and letting instead of letting the customer prospects. We give you the tool. It should be mandatory. We should spell the word optional correctly. But this should be a mandatory tool moving forward, right? And we'll talk about this. Most customers struggle, or MSPs struggle to sell because they lack the confidence, and the ones that are growing well have the confidence. It translates into, high growth. And you kind of equate it to a couple different things, right? You go to the doctor because you're confident in their ability to, diagnose, the problem and help optimize an outcome. And it's no different with customers and prospects, right? They don't just buy technology from you, right? They're they're buying confidence from you. They're buying outcomes. And that's your job, is to help, shape outcomes, optimize the customer's experience, the customer's business. And I think a lot of MSPs, a lot of businesses, lose sight of the fact that that's really what business you are in, right? You're not in the business of providing email security or backup, right? You're in the business of optimizing your customers, right? So we'll walk through this here. So let's go through, and we talk about these two different sales motions, using this for customers and using this for prospects, right? With customers, you've already earned the trust and respect. You should have anyway. You've earned the right to run the scout report. And probably in 90% of the cases, you control, the environment, the tenant. So you should have the, unfettered ability to run or integrate and run the initial scan and the scout report, right? These findings, again, these are fact-based findings because it's their environment, it's their tools. These should allow you to standardize, allow you to show risk, and quantify, expense, and they should help you easily renew customers, right? Because it's another dynamic, and it's, opening your customers and prospects' eyes to really the totality of the sprawl and a wasted expense, right? Then we'll talk through about, close a 30 or 90-day optimization plan, to start. So if you're not confident in your sales ability, this is something that you can start with. Let's, do the scan, and let's figure out how, collectively together optimize your environment over the next 30, 60, 90 days. I think that is kind of the out if you're not strong at sales. Is that, and if you want to just add this into the toolbox and not monetize it, that's your choice. But we're pretty, we're in the mindset that you should be charging for optimization, ongoing monitoring, because it's not a one-time thing, right? You don't just look at your expenses once. You don't look at your applications once. This should be an ongoing monitoring, course correction type of capability. And then the same thing with prospects. One of the biggest challenges that most MSPs have, I've been generalizing a lot, but most MSPs have a hard time differentiating, right? They have a hard time getting their foot in the door with a prospect, right? There are some phenomenal tools back in the day. I think we touched on this in some of the last, webinars. I mean, the ID agent tool that we built with the dark web scan. I would argue that was, probably one of the best, if not the best, get your foot in the door tool over the last 10 years. But even prior to that, there were some great network assessment type of tools that are out there that MSPs use. Unfortunately, the result of that was basically a phone book, presentation that you had to try to take out to a customer. But today, right, you can create urgency, you can demonstrate value literally in 15 minutes or less. And we'll walk through this. I mean, you can leverage your differentiation, the optimization approach with this. You can run an assessment with them, and we'll talk about this concept of together. I'm going to try to drill it in everybody's head. You can show them their actual waste, risk, overlap, ownership gaps, and then again, this should help you close managed services or at least paid optimization project work if you do this right. I mean, both of these motions expand trust and creates urgency because again, you're showing them their data, you're showing them their gaps, you're showing them areas of optimization and wasted expense. So let me pause there for a second. Let me see. I don't know if any questions have come in.
Yeah, okay, real quick. Yeah, we have a great question from Lenny. She was asking if you could elaborate on, this is between the QBR expansion motion and of course the tool for prospecting because it works for both, which is
Yeah,
really
no,
exciting. Yeah,
yep. Yeah, we'll go through some of these slides, right? That's the purpose is to take you through both of these
great.
scenarios, right?
She said thank you.
You got it. Cool. All right. So as I mentioned, right, a lot of folks, when we're talking with some of our partners, they're kind of going in, guns blazing, and say, hey, we have a tool that shows applications and tracks expenses, right? And in some cases, that getting very to the point, down to the point works, right? But especially for partners, right? This is about collaboration. It's about, working in partnership with the customers and prospects, right? And so what we see works most effectively, right? Again, think about yourselves as either, doctor or a mechanic or somebody doing a diagnosis, right? Is that we want you to see what you're actually using. We want you to see what you're paying for. We want you to see where the risk exists, and we want you to see where ownership is missing, right? These are fundamental, right? Because most often, let's take it from a customer standpoint, you're going in the QBR and you're showing, hey, look how great we did. We opened and closed these tickets, right? And we stopped these attacks. And over time, it's noise in, noise out, right? They don't really care about how many tickets you closed. I mean, I hate to burst your bubbles, but what they do care about, right, is how to optimize their business, right? They care about expense. They care about risk, right? And you have a tool now that you can very quickly show where the sprawl is, all the applications, where the risk is. I mean, again, we talk about these statistics all the time where, in fact, when we, first, concepted this tool, at least the integration about a year and a half ago, and we ran the first scan of our Microsoft environment, right? At that point, I would have guessed that we had, I don't know, 40 or so different applications. And that first pass, we had 107, right? And we're a relatively small organization. And the fact that we were using 107 was eye-opening. I mean, to say the least. And so we started to dig into it, and we're like, oh, we've got redundancy in project management tools. We have redundancy in sales and marketing tools, right? We had applications that we had thought that we had canceled, and turns out they weren't canceled because we didn't have accountability and visibility internally to keep up with this stuff. And so moving forward, I think it's incumbent upon every MSP to think of themselves as really a trusted advisor. I mean, you have to put yourself in that mindset, right? Because if you just want to sell technology, right, then just call yourself a VAR and move on, or even a reseller and move on, right? Even that's the concept of managed services, right? That's it is what it is. It kind of defines an industry, but this is all about managed business optimization. And that's, you need to put yourself in that mindset. You're there to optimize your customer, whether it's their network, whether it's the number of tools, their email, everything that you're built to do is all built around optimization. And so the idea is that you're offering this diagnostic up front, right? And you're collectively showing visibility of what's going on, right? And the proof is in the product. Proof is in what you see and what you share and how you do this collectively with the partners and prospects. So you talked about kind of the approach and the hooks and what you're, conversationally and what the close is or what the ask is with each one of these different groups. Let's take the customer or the prospects, for example, on the left, right? It's about differentiating and building trust in the front end, and this is a very easy, low-hanging fruit way to do it. We've got partners that are doing this as a free assessment. And then we have partners that are doing this as a paid assessment or paid optimization service, as a way to get their foot in the door, maybe of co-managed or hybrid IT. But on the prospect side, before we really start to dig in and start to, provide, or make recommendations about, which tools and packages and all that stuff to use, right? Let us sit down and together do this assessment and show you exactly what's happening, right? So I know we've got the Microsoft lift coming out here in about a week and a half, but you should be able to, in 15 minutes, in person or via Zoom with a partner, authenticate to their environment, and then pull in the applications and show them exactly what they have. And I guarantee you, I would put money on it that 99% of your customers, and heck, most of you had no clue, because we get that all the time. I know Tim could probably speak to this, ad nauseum. But when we go through onboarding and we do that with partners, every partner is blown away by how many applications they actually use or that are traversing the network, right? Or APIs or what have you that are accessing your environment, or you're authenticating to. Via Microsoft. So, it is ridiculously easy to demonstrate value and trust upfront by doing this. Again, it's in theory, no different than what we did with ID Agent back in the day, right? That might have been a little scarier, but I would argue that because of sprawl and AI that's just unmanaged, that this is even more of a well, it's a larger threat vector, right? Your surface attack area has gone up exponentially. So from a prospect standpoint, this should be a very easy and trust building exercise, right? You're doing this together. You've got a read-only access, and you can, during that session, whether again, if it's in person, you're lucky enough to sit down with them in person, or you're doing it via Zoom, you can authenticate and you can disconnect, within 10 minutes, right? And you can, give that assurance that you're not accessing their network. You're doing it together, right? From a customer standpoint, and we talked about this earlier, you already or should already have the trust, right? And you most likely have control over, that tenant. So your ability to do this is even easier, right? But the game changer is sitting down with the customer and saying, look, I want to show you what you can't see, right? I'm going to show you what can be optimized across your applications and subscriptions, little typo there, expenses, contracts, and risk. And the ask is, again, is all about, doing this in collaboration in furthering that trust. Let's look at this together, identify the top 3 actions we can take this quarter, right? We can take collectively this quarter. And if you lack the confidence to sell this upfront, then you can do this as a no cost, service. But I would argue that the first time you do this should be, the eye-opening, setting the tone conversation. And then, downstream, this should absolutely be a paid service. You should be being paid to help them not just manage their network and keep their email flowing, but you should be paid to reduce their footprint, reduce their sprawl, help them understand AI risk, help them understand, application sprawl and expense sprawl, right? From an executive standpoint, you're dealing with a little bit larger organization or regulated organizations, right? Same thing. It's not about adding more tools, right? This is about optimizing and accountability. Who owns these applications? What do they cost? What risks it creates? And what you should do next, as an organization. Again, these are things that have existed for years, but no one's really put a presentation layer to it, right? And helped create actions. And so hopefully you're starting in your mind, starting to understand, by showing the gaps, by showing the redundancy, how you can help optimize the customer's environments and look at ways to sell more solutions. And I've got some screenshots here in a minute we'll run through. So let me pause there again, see if there's any more questions coming in.
No, not yet.
Okay, good. All right. So again, relative to, how aggressive or confident, and we talked about, confidence before, you are, you can do this a number of ways up front. One, it is about easily connecting to the identity. Look, connecting to Microsoft, connecting to G Suite, right? And showing the application sprawl, right? Some may feel less confident in talking about contracts and talking about transactions. And so, that this is a, perfectly, you know, strong and good place to stop at that first conversation with a prospect or a partner or a current customer. The next step is adding contracts. And so, sitting down collectively and saying, let's take the first handful of contracts and let's start adding them. In that way, you have to start to have, create visibility. And then third, we've had some just phenomenally wonderful uh, case studies where partners again sat down collectively and said, "Let's go through this together." Right? Let's you authenticate the bank account and credit card, right? And let's take 30 minutes and run through the top 50 expenses that have come in, and let's see where the redundancy in subscriptions are, the redundancy in different tools, right? Because it's one thing to see what's authenticated, but it's another thing to see what you're actually paying for, right? And so, some MSPs have said, well, I don't think my customer is going to let me do this, right? Honestly, it's about the approach, right? It's not about saying, hey, we're going to get, full visibility over your expenses, because in reality, you're not. But what you can do is sit down and say, hey, look, we want to collectively, bring that level of situational awareness to you. You need to see all the applications, all the sprawl. We need to start helping you, get a grasp or grip on what contracts are out there, the renewal dates, and what's a killer to every business. I mean, literally every business is the expense, the blind spending, the forgotten about applications that you're paying for. So again, these should be very collaborative conversations, with partners. If you don't feel as confident, you're talking through or getting them to sit down and authenticating via Plaid into their account with you, then that's, again, you can stop at number one, and that's totally fine, right? You can build a very successful practice. You can identify tons of cross-sell opportunities, upsell opportunities, because if you pull that into the Navistack, you can see what the gaps are, and what you're providing and what they should have moving forward. So this should be, a phenomenal sales tool or opportunity identification tool, because once you start to visualize what they have and what they don't have, right, that should be the bingo card for your sales team to be able to go in and say, all right, this is what we're going to sell next, right? This is what they don't have. This is what we're providing. And this is what should be the next logical, solution. So this should give you, if you do it right, just on, the first part, number one here, this should give you, for most businesses, at least 10 to 15 new sales conversations to have with a partner, with a prospect, just by visualizing what they have. So I think it's important to highlight, uh, inside the application, what you're really seeing when you do either the G Suite or the Microsoft uh, sync, right? The 365 Scout or the Google Scout sync, right? This is what's happening when those applications are coming in. You're seeing total applications, you're seeing total users, right? You're seeing application status. So whether you've listed it as approved or if it's restricted or if it's unknown. You're seeing which applications have either that are either AI native or they're AI enabled. So they maybe have, Claude or Gemini or OpenAI built into the application. You're seeing the number of users for each one of those applications, and you're seeing, in here, these aren't actually not going to be filled in when it comes in the first time, but for the first time, you can start to assign these to a department and you can assign these to an owner, right? So again, going back to that last slide, if you full stop here and you do nothing but show, this to a customer, and I'll show you the report in a second, but this should be enough to have a very substantive, engaged conversation in QBR with every single one of your current partners, right? Showing them the sprawl, setting that level of accountability between departments and owners, right? Setting the status. This should be a service in and of itself that you provide to your customers. Again, whether it's paid or not, that's kind of on you. But again, this should be a paid service that you provide to customers because um, customers aren't thinking about sprawl. They're not thinking about accountability, right? And it's your job to optimize and help them understand accountability, right? And not just do it once. You should be doing this at minimum quarterly, but ideally monthly, right? And as new applications get authenticated, you should get obviously alerts. They'll get alerts depending on how you set it up. So again, this is about becoming a team sport and being really engaged with your partner moving forward or your prospect moving forward. So this is when you're clicking on the drawer here, go back, you click on the drawer of this application, right? You'll see what's next, right? You'll see again if you assign it to department, assign it to an owner, you'll see the users and you'll see the last login, right? So here's the last login, back in March. Are we still paying for a license that we shouldn't be paying for that someone logged in 4 months ago, right? This happens every day, all day, 10 times a day with your customers and with you as well, right? You're just not thinking about how to keep up with this. And this is that application creep. This is the expense creep that absolutely buries businesses moving forward. I give that example of ourselves. I mean, that first one, I think we talk about it. That first one was $7,200, right? But then when we started going through the applications, right, and looking at the licenses that we weren't using, right, and where we had overages, I think it came up to like something 11 or $12,000 for us just in that first pass. We're now at a point where we can definitively say that we save the average MSP to start $25,000. We save the average MSP customer. In fact, we need to, I guess you look at that sheet again, Tim, and maybe a reminder after this. But we save you save your customer on average $52,000. $52,000. And that's throwing out the highs and the lows. I mentioned we've had some extreme use cases where the overages, they've forgotten about subscriptions and applications have been in the high seven or high six figures, low seven figures, right? I mean, 700, 800, 900,000. I think we're at the $1 million mark with a partner. This happens, as I mentioned, all day, every day, 10 times a day to every single business out there. And so this is, you want to demonstrate value, You want to demonstrate differentiation. You want to demonstrate, togetherness with your customers and prospects. Sit down with them for an hour and run through these, and you'll be blown away by how much you can actually save them up front, right? And that savings should absolutely translate into downstream additive revenue for you and your business, period. Um, so talked about, one, if you go back, bringing applications in, clicking into the drawers, seeing what's what. But we've put this purposely together, to help you go back and then help them improve the score, right? So we have a new version of this coming out here on the 28th. It'll look a lot more fancy, look pretty darn cool. And then it'll have the AI risk built into it as well. But when you run this the first time, your score is going to be zero, right? Because you haven't assigned a department, you haven't assigned an owner, and you haven't gone through and said, all right, this is not an approved application, right? Or it's restricted, or or it is approved. This should be a tool that you sit down with your partners, your customers every quarter, again, ideally every month, and help them improve their score. So the goal is to get to 100% on this. And this, honestly, for you as as a service provider, should be ridiculously easy to do, right? Let's turn these QBRs into just vomiting, stats and data to turn it into an interactive session, right? It's you need to force them to sit down in 30 minutes and run through this collectively and help them understand a baseline, help them understand their sprawl, right? That is your job as a service provider, is to help optimize and bring that level of visibility. All right. Next step is, let's add your top vendor contracts, and you can decide whether you want to do this, as let's kind of test the waters. Let's add the top three. Let's add the top five, or, let's sit down and add the top 20. Many of you and even a lot of your clients are adding more than just their applications, right? They're sitting down and say, hey, can I track my lease, right? My rent, my automobile lease, my insurance. And so in the customer view, when you've got the customer Navistack, it has the general business categories. And if there's not one, if you guys need for us to add one, we can do those pretty easily. But the customer Navistack, your Navistack as a service provider is going to be more technical, right? Because you're thinking in terms of authentication, and it actually is an MSP view, but your customer's not thinking in terms of authentication and RMM and PSA and stuff like that. You can turn on those categories for them, but they're thinking more in terms of, maybe email. Maybe they're thinking, they've got their project management tools, they've got their sales marketing tools, finance tools. That's the level of visibility that you can help bring to the table for them. So you can add, obviously, you attach the contracts. The AI import is beneficial for that. The amounts, the billing types, the contract expiration dates, the notice dates, and whether it auto renews, right? So sit down, walk them through this. Same thing, you can, sit with them and allow them to authenticate to or be applied to their bank account, right? You can do it in one session. They can pull all the applications or transactions in. Typically takes between 8 to 10 minutes, depending on the volume. But you can sit down and say, look, let's spend 15 minutes and go through, the transactions from last month. Let's look at the recurring transactions. Let's identify which ones are applications that we want to track within our stack, right? Within our Navistack, right? And what the expense is. Again, your job is to bring visibility and get them to think about how to optimize their business, right? This shouldn't be a hard conversation to have, right? This shouldn't be tough. It shouldn't be, we talk about taking friction and conflict out of the sales process, right? This should be, hey, let's do this together. Let's sit down. We'll authenticate. And heck, again, if you want us to authenticate and do it once and then, turn it off, at least we can start there and do this. Maybe we can do it next quarter, It could be a quarterly thing. Um, we would prefer that you leave it on and run because they're going to start to see the number of new transactions. You can set up their alerting within the platform. And again, all of this, we can take you back through in detail, and we will, darn it, help you sell this to your customers. I mean, get us on sales calls with your prospects and customers. If that's what it takes to help move you guys forward with this tool, then by all means, we will do this with you in conjunction. Um, so, we talked about, again, so you guys know, it's like you don't want to sell products, right? Feature, benefit. You don't want to get in these bake-offs, right? What you're doing is you're turning it into an optimization story, an executive story, right? This is what we're surfacing at minimum. You're showing the shadow IT, all these one-off applications that are coming in, right? You're showing the redundant tools. Because I've mentioned project management and marketing. Um, those are the areas that we see, I don't know, 80% of the time that are just wild overlap, and communication tools, right? Over, duplication using Teams, Slack, Zoom, life size, all these different, teleconferencing, type solutions or video conferencing solutions. Redundancy is just every business has it in applications. Um, you'll start to see obsolete tools again, things that you forgot about that need to go away, right? Whether it's just, accessing the environment, or it's still being paid for, right? It's what's obsolete. Again, we're gonna be leaning heavily into AI, and so you'll see the AI enabled tool, I think we give the example of, now on a lot of these Teams meetings or Zoom meetings, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 people that have scribes that come in, and so now you're what was once a confidential conversation is now being added to, 3 or 4 different, AI scribes, right? So now your data is just all over the place. And then standardization. A lot of this is really about standardization, and setting ownership, accountability, and discipline. It's about the patterns that you'll start to see. We see it, right? See it on every call. We see patterns, usage patterns. Um, you know, you see these patterns. You probably already know these patterns exist with your customers, but now you have something you can help visualize it with. I was going to get too in depth with this, but this is actually coming out pretty soon. I'm going to stop share for a sec. I'm going to jump into our environment so you can see what Betty, to start, will be doing for you here for 1 second. So let me stop share. Let me open this screen. And let me go back here and hit share. All right. So I'm in our tests MSP environment. You see this little icon here, Betty, and this I promise you will be game changing for not just your business, but for your customers. But specifically, we've got some just basic prompts put in here. Where am I spending without a contract? Am I too dependent on a single vendor? What is my stack score? And we'll talk about some of this stuff. And so Betty will look at your applications, look at your contracts, look at your expenses, and start to help you understand, dependencies, understanding overlap, right? So to start, it'll be prompt based, and you can ask, Betty questions. You can do the same thing once you get your customer's environment stood up. You can work with them and say, all right, let's go through this together and let's see what Betty sees, right? So in this case, you've got 8+ contracts covering, let's see, you got a high vendor concentration risk, right? Because you've got certain applications coming from a certain vendor, right? Peers your size typically cap single vendor exposure to 3 subcategories. You're at 8. You'll start to see us come out with a ton more benchmarking over the next 60 to 90 days, right? Are you overspending in these categories relative to your peers? That's some cool stuff that we're working on. But just do another, what's your stack score? We'll start to show scoring based on how, your contemporaries, your peers feel about these applications, right? Whether they're, strong or less capable applications. So there might be some little subjectivity built into here, but we want to make sure again that from an application standpoint and stack standpoint that you've got as strong and efficient stack as possible. So Betty will start providing some significant value here on the stack and on the expenses. All right, so Betty's coming out on the 11th of August. And then we've got some pretty exciting updates. That's the V2 of Betty, and then Betty for your customers here coming out shortly after that as well. So let me stop share, jump back to my slides here real quick, and I'll do any questions check in.
Yeah, Kevin, there was a question earlier about when you look at Betty, is there going to be a point in time where we can ask you questions that it would tell us exactly what the customer is missing from a compliance standpoint when they review your scout reports?
Yeah. So I have a really amazing. Fine. I'll just show you. I'll show you something real quick. How about that? Um, so
So versus them interpreting it, Betty will be able to interpret them for them so they can have
yeah,
that conversation quickly.
yeah. So again, this I'm gonna be too get people too hyped up. Because I gotta make sure our dev team, if I say a date, I gotta, be able to hold the dev team to the date. But so we're looking at in this case a university, right? We just kind of ran it against a model internally, and you can see in here um, primary concerns of the complexity of the environment. How many redundant LMSs are in this particular university? Um, you can start to get into how do you help the university consolidate or normalize some of these applications, right? This particular university,
For like 30
small regional.
seconds.
What's
Can you hear
that?
me? You froze for like 30 seconds.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so when you
Uh,
started to show the report, you were getting ready to tell them what it was able to uncover.
Okay, yeah. So this is looking at a small regional university as an example, and it is showing that there is in this case, there's 350 different applications that are in this environment, and there's redundant applications across multiple different sectors, right? So this is just the LMSs that organization is using, right? So you as a service provider or trusted advisor, you're going in and sitting down and saying, look, what is the official LMS? Do you need to have, 9 different LMSs that fundamentally, and there might be, reasons for it, but, do you have to have all of these different video conferencing tools, right? Is there overlap? Are there ways to normalize these things? So, same thing on calendaring, scheduling, right? Are you using all of these calendarings across the tools across all of your departments, right? So let's set a level of standardization. Let's get you down from 350 applications down to 200, right? So yeah, this is one example of where we take the data internally and we can look at it from not just an application standpoint, and I know I'm going long here, but we can also look at it from an expense standpoint, right? So what are the likely areas to normalize um, your expenses, right? What are the different areas that you can, really optimize your business and expenses? So yeah, the short answer to that question is that it's going to be pretty significant. And I know a couple of people some compliance insights. So let me jump back to this real quick, and I'll try to run through these last couple of slides. And again, anything we can do, questions, follow-ups. I mean, my email's easy. Tim and DV, but if you look at the findings, how you translate this into a money conversation, right? Talk about, even if you don't integrate or just start working on contracts or integrate or connect to the bank accounts and credit cards, right? You have immediate savings opportunities with just by showing them the totality of the applications in the environment, right? You can have, there's some that are looking at negotiation, savings, right? And then there's strategic consolidation. There's a handful that are getting aggressive, um, with this. Um, it typically works with businesses at scale, 500 users and above. But the immediate savings conversation, not just optimization, potential savings optimization, is material. Again, even if you just integrate, Microsoft or G Suite. When you get into how to sell a new prospect in one workflow, we talked about the hook. You got the consent, you're doing it collaboratively. You do the scan, right? The rank will with Betty will again that report that we launched will have the top 5 opportunities. So we're gonna spoon feed you how to sell to these customers. You present the findings and then you close with a managed service or paid optimization project, right? We just found enough to structure a 30-day optimization plan. Next step is to validate savings, assign owners, doing this in collaboration, right, with them. Um, how to sell inside a customer QBR before, right? You have access, you run the report, you open with accountability, you reframe, you show patterns and assign ownership, right? And afterward, you send an action plan. And I'll show you, we've got some really cool checklists that you just want to start with the checklist. That's totally fine. Um, I'll send this out to you, but you got objective handling. Again, these are the flyers that you can drop your logos on. This checklist, I think, is 8 pages. So, you can start scoring it. You can do it manually. We'll give you this as well. There's a customer assessment and a prospect assessment. Um, Offering an assessment, optimization plan, a managed service. Um, you know, this is this should help you establish a very clear next step with these customers and prospects, right? Again, it's factual data. There's collaborative activities that you should be doing with these partners. Um, I didn't get this 8-minute role play, but if you guys need me to help role play with you, I'll be glad to do that. We're going to announce here in the next couple of weeks a series of 5 in-person sales workshops that we're going to do throughout the country. So stay tuned for that. We're going to offer sales certifications. We're going to offer business optimization certifications. And then you'll actually have a business optimized logo that you can put up on your site as well. So they'll come out here coming up. And then same thing, close with an owner, a date, and a paid next step, right? Based on what we found, we're not trying to sell the tool, right? We're trying to help you optimize, remove risk, eliminate waste. And again, we want to start with a 30-day optimization plan. We're going to start with these 3 specific actions, right? We're going to, assign the departments ownership, accountability, and look at redundancy. If you can stop there, you have done a world of service to your customers by adding a ton of value, right? So do this. You'll have this checklist, right? You'll see the hook, the read-only consent, the executive lens. We're going to send all this stuff to you. The customer doesn't need another tool. They need proof, priorities, owners, and a plan. And it's your job to give them that plan. So that's it. And I appreciate everybody jumping on and send me an email, send DB an email. We'll be glad to help you out.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.